To the regulars, welcome here. And to those who are visiting, also thanks for joining us. So I have the absolute pleasure to introduce my business partner, the one who cares for us, the one who taught us and continue to teach us about the abundant philosophy. Let's share what we have. Let's assist one another. And ultimately, Gail, you're the reason why we are together. You're the one who brought us together. And we're happy. So this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce Gail. And over to you, Gail.
Thank you so much, Al. When Monique suggested, that I look at doing this for everybody as a year-end kind of thing, I was thinking about the state of leadership, in our country is terribly bleak at the moment. Every day there's an announcement of this one's been arrested for another 12 million fraud and so on. And it can get quite depressing. And I think one of the important things about leadership is to bring hope. So therefore, who do we look to bring that hope? And of course, there's always our iconic leader who we should never forget. So I'm just going to share this presentation. I was invited by the IBC and I presented this in Toronto. And I'm going to start with a video clip that sets the background to events in the incredible lifespan of his life.
The time for talking has arrived. The time for negotiation has arrived.
After 27 years in South African jails, Nelson Mandela is a free man.
And Jonty Rhodes has demolished the stumps, and umpire Bucknor has given him out.
I know I can make it on my own if I try, but I'm searching for a great heart to stand me by underneath the African sky.
Good morning and welcome to this very special day in the history of South Africa.
That is it. The final whistle in South Africa win this Rugby World Cup final by 15 points to 12.
In focus this evening, the glitch that could short-circuit cyberspace.
On New Year's Day 2000, is it possible that we're in for an international disaster because so many of the world's computers will be utterly confused by what date it is?
This breaking news to report to you right now. A plane has collided with the World Trade Center building in New York. We have live pictures of that.
He became the first black person from Africa to successfully summit Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth.
And the Oscar goes to Charlize Theron from Alaska.
Breaking news here. Stocks all around the world are tanking because of the crisis on Wall Street.
This is Africa.
Nelson Mandela finally home after a life journey that was long, proud and honored.
As the stone was being laid, it doesn't need a stone to remember him. He'll always be in our hearts, and I think that said it all.
I saw him 3 times. The first was the day he was released from Victor Verster prison. I was traveling around in Cape Town and I was following his release on the radio. So he kind of knew the route that he would take. And so I stopped on a bridge to wait. And it wasn't very long. And he came swooping through underneath. And I can remember my response was very emotional. I actually burst into tears. One just had a sense that an extraordinary chapter of South African history was about to unfold. The second time was I was traveling on the N1 from Pretoria. My boys were still quite young, and Stuart, sitting on the back seat, started shouting, "Ami, Nelson Mandela's waving at us." And I looked right, and there he was. He'd wound his window down and was waving and smiling at the boys. They got so excited. They went home and painted him a picture that I had to post. The third time was when we launched the Civil Society Initiative in South Africa, which was headed up by Rolf Meyer, who I was coaching at the time. And they invited both Mandela and Clinton to speak at that launch. When Mandela got up to speak, he said, "You know, this reminds me a little of when I was in Cuba, and I was traveling around with their leader, Fidel Castro." And he said, and the crowds were shouting and waving, and I thought at first that they were shouting for me. But then I realized they weren't shouting for me at all. They were shouting for their leader. And so is it tonight. You're not here for me. You are here because of President Clinton. And of course, he was right. When Clinton left the podium, everybody rushed him to shake his hand, to greet him. Had we known what little time we had left with Mandela, we would have rushed him. We would have shaken his hand. So when I started doing the research for this project, I was struck by the words of Nadine Gordimer, our Nobel laureate, when she said we had lived at the same time as this incredible man. We had gone through the awful repression of apartheid to a time when a country could negotiate itself out of a revolution. And I remember the time very well because I was working with them, and it was just extraordinary to watch history unfold. Then I came across a very serious tranche of research that was done by Professor Liz Boyson, whose permission I have to share it with you today. She's a professor at the South African Management Institute of Management Sciences. And what the study did was it looked at South African leadership styles, Afrocentric versus Eurocentric. And I looked at the study and I tried to ascertain, where does Mandela fit? And at times he's very comfortable in the Afrocentric box, but there are times when he doesn't fit at all. When you understand his leadership, you realize that he embodied what Albert Koopman called pragmatic humanism. What is that? It's emotional intelligence. So forgive me if I digress just for a moment, get on my hobby horse, and just share with you some of the essential tenets of emotional intelligence. So we know that in hard times, the soft stuff often goes away. But EQ, it turns out, isn't so soft. If emotional blindness impairs your ability to be compassionate, then, EQ isn't a luxury. It's an essential element of leadership. And of course, we know that only 7% of leadership is about intellect. 93% comes from presence, honesty, authenticity, creativity, trust. And those are all competencies that Mandela embodied. UCLA's research, that's exactly what I've said. And if you look at these elements such as presence, authenticity, creativity, trust, integrity, now think of the leaders who flouted these competencies and how they are falling. Egon Zehnder placed CEOs around the world. A few years ago, they placed about 227 leaders, CEOs, globally. A year later, 23 failed. What was interesting when they did the research to find out why, in every single case, it showed that the CEOs that failed had an over-reliance on IQ, no ability to cooperate and collaborate with the team. No capacity for empathy for others, and they had failed. So there's the line in the sand. You know, there's just no space for command and control styles of leadership anymore. It's really all entrenched in emotional intelligence. So yes, as a leader, you are the tone setter, you are the keeper of that human climate, and you need to be the motivator. We have seen this happen with such stark clarity when, you know, you get a resident leader who comes into the room and there's something bad that's happened, and the leader says, I've worked long and hard with each and every one of you. I've experienced your loyalty and your commitment. And I know if we put our heads together, we'll be able to find a solution. Well, neurologically, the neurons are firing on the left-hand side of the prefrontal cortex. The good hormones flood the brain and body. And of course, it unlocks this prefrontal cortex. And now they can stretch. They will be innovative. They will be able to find the solutions. As opposed to the dissonant leader who comes into the room. In a 50th of a second, the team will take one look at him, at his expression on his face, his short, sharp gestures, his clipped bows. And in a 50th of a second, he will plunge that group into cognitive dissonance. The neurons fire on the right-hand side, the bad hormones flood the brain and body. And by the way, those hormones will stay in the body for 6 hours. It will be impossible for them to be innovative or to even grasp solutions that they know. And that is the thing about dissonant and resonant leaders. So, global consulting firm partners who showed high EQ competencies earned 139% more than their lower EQ partners. If that's not enough motivation to get up on this EQ stuff, then nothing is. So let me tell you how I've experienced this. A few years ago, I was working with the partners, very young partners, at the Deloitte practice in Pretoria, and I knew from the outset that there was a handful of them who had exceptional competencies. I didn't know what it was because EQ hadn't arrived in South Africa yet. So I developed this model on conversational skills because they just had this ability to drive the collective emotions of a team to a positive realm to add economic value. They were optimistic. They celebrated their diversity even long, long before it was fashionable. So it came as no surprise when Grant Gelink phoned me up and he said, I've just been made the CEO. Alan next door has been appointed the COO and we're coming for a top-up. So it was absolutely fascinating to watch how their leadership impacted the firm. So I don't know if any of you remember that tragedy that happened. It was a few years ago now. There was a small plane that took off at Grand Central and on board there were 4 Deloittians. And it crashed shortly after takeoff and it killed everybody on board. When that tragedy broke, it fell to Alan Swickers to deal with it because Grant Gelink was on a plane to New York. And the consummate compassion that Alan brought to that tragedy has become a test case for dealing with tragedies of that nature. He created a memorial in Building 3 for people to go and post flowers and put notes. He organized a Deloittian funeral held by Deloittians. He spent weeks assuaging the grief of the poor families who'd lost their members. He was so busy dealing with them that he couldn't even attend the funeral of his own sister-in-law. He gave 30 live media interviews on the first day. He called all the partners together on that first day and he told them what had happened and he said, send your people home. When Alan retired, he invited me to his office to show me a book that his staff had put together on the event. When I read those letters, nowhere did it say, thank you for making us the most or one of the most successful financial services organizations. It said, thank you for leading. Thank you for caring. That's really what is important. And of course, today, Alan, serves at the Deloitte University, and he's just an incredible man. And, when I get some youngsters from Deloitte and I say to them, well, what made you join Deloitte? And they say, I was inspired by Alan. So that's what resonant leadership is. It flows from the top right to the bottom. So Ram Charam and Jeffrey Colvin say that the number one reason why CEOs fail is they put strategy before people. Successful CEOs shine not in planning or finances, but in the area of EQ. They show integrity, acumen, effective communication, and trust-building behavior. And of course, those are all elements that Mandela embodied. So let's go back and have a look at this incredible study that was done by Professor Liz Boyson and see where Nelson Mandela fits. So the first construct is humane orientation, which reflects the degree to which society encourages individuals to be fair and rewards them for being altruistic, generous, gentle, kind to others. Where do you think, and this was, done 20 years ago, so things have changed since then. Where do you think Black leaders scored against their white counterparts, above or below?
Above.
Yeah, they scored
above.
And yes, above. And of course, Mandela fits into this box beautifully. And the examples I can think of him related to this, first of all, was the death of Chris Hani, one of our most popular leaders in the country, and he was assassinated in his driveway. Fortunately, a neighbor had spotted a getaway vehicle and had written down the registration number. When the news broke, Mandela was in Pune at the time, and he immediately went to the SABC television studios and he made this address, and I'm going to read it to you. And if there was ever a time, that embodied who he was to become as a leader, it was this time. Remember, rioting and looting just exploded. It left 70 people dead. Fear was palpable among whites as anger was among blacks. And he said, tonight, I'm reaching out to every single South African, black and white, from the very depths of my being. A white man full of prejudice and hate came to our country and committed a deed so foul that our whole nation now teeters on the brink of disaster. A white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life so that we may know and bring to justice this assassin. So that the country was prevented from going up in flames was, attributed so much to Nelson Mandela and to this moment. The second example I can think of Mandela was that of his jailer, James Gregory. Gregory was just a young man when he came to Robben Island, and it was Mandela who went up to him and shook his hand and said, "Welcome to Robben Island." And Gregory responded in Zulu because he could speak fluent Zulu, and Mandela was stunned, and the two became firm friends. When Mandela's eldest son, Tembi, was killed in a car accident whilst on Robben Island, it fell to Gregory to provide what little comfort he could. But the interesting thing is that 20 years later, to the day, James Gregory's own son was killed in a car accident. This time, it was Mandela who kept him from the brink of suicide by calling him daily. The next construct is collectivism. So this also known as Ubuntu. There's your key word, putting the interests ahead of others without depersonalizing them. Where do you think black leaders scored against their white counterparts, above or below? Above? Above, absolutely above. And the greatest example I can think of related to Mandela was when he walked onto the Ellis Park Stadium wearing that Springbok jersey. That single event did more to unite black and white people than any other single event in our democracy. And to understand why, we need to go back a little in history. Remember, during apartheid, countries were banned from playing rugby with the Springboks, but there were certain countries who skipped the boycott and they continued to play. So now there was a lot of anger in the ANC and moves afoot to get rid of the symbol. But Mandela fought to keep it. He said, whilst I was on Robben Island, I tried to understand what motivated the Afrikaner. I learned their language. I read their literature. And I understand that the identity of a people is an important thing. And, you know, he was absolutely right. I can remember at the last World Cup, I was there among people screaming and shouting of all creeds and colors, wearing that Springbok jersey. It was an amazing moment, and indeed is something to be proud of. It's truly something that we are the best at in the world. The next construct is gender egalitarianism, valuing and working with women. Where did black leaders score against their white counterparts, above or below?
Below.
Below. Why do you say that, Al?
I don't know. Just a sense, Gail.
There's a cultural,
well, you're absolutely right.
Piece.
Yeah.
It is. It's patriarchy in this country. So, yes, it's. But Mandela doesn't fit into this box, and I'm going to read you one of his letters that he wrote to Winnie, and you'll get a sense, you know, of his feeling and thinking of women at the time. I've worked with a lot of female ministers, and many of them have told me they had to do all the work, but the ultimate decision could only be ratified upstairs by the male. So I think it's changing now, but 20 years ago it was pretty entrenched. But let me read you his letter so that you can get a sense of his thinking at the time. And this is dated 2nd of September 1979. And he says, you will be quite right to regard 79 as Women's Year. They are demanding that society live up to its sermons on sex equality. The French lady Simone Veil has lived through frightful experiences to become the president of the European Parliament, while Maria Pinto-Silva cracks the whip in Portugal. From reports, it is not clear who leads the Carter family. There are times when Carter's Rosalind seems to be wearing the trousers. I need hardly mention the name of Margaret Thatcher. Britain is in many respects still the centre of the world. What happens there attracts attention from far and wide. Indira Gandhi will rightly remind us that in this respect, Europe is merely following the example of Asia, which in the last 2 decades has produced no less than 2 lady premiers. Indeed, past centuries have seen many female rulers, Isabella of Spain, Elizabeth I of England, Catherine the Great of Russia, the Batoka Queen Mantatisi, she came from Limpopo, and many more. But all of these first ladies became first ladies in spite of themselves, through heredity. Today, the spotlight falls on these women who can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Isn't that just beautiful? You know, so his thinking was just way ahead of anybody. So the next one is uncertainty avoidance, tolerating and coping with uncertainty. This is a very interesting construct. Where do you think black leaders scored against their white counterparts, above or below?
I think above.
Below.
Above, yes. Was that Pietru? Or was that, yes.
It was Aaron.
Hello, Aaron. Yes, they scored much higher. How could Nelson Mandela ever have said, I always knew that one day I would feel the grass under my feet and be a free man? How do you write that when you're in jail for 27 years? Unless you tolerate uncertainty. So yes, they scored much higher in this regard. And the very interesting thing, ladies, is to know that women have a greater propensity for tolerating uncertainty. And that's one of the reasons why they need to be accelerated into positions of leadership, because of this. So, and it's also the way we look at time. So, you know, if you think of it, Afrocentric cultures view time as polychronic. So it is a long arc. It's never ending. You can never run out of it. So it's, you know, that's why you can take time to get to know people. Whereas white cultures are monochronic. So time is urgent. You need to manage it and so on. So that's why it's just a fascinating construct. The next one is future orientation, and this is encouraging rewards future-orientated behavior such as planning, investing in the future, delay of gratification. Where do you think black leaders scored against their white counterparts, above or below?
Below.
Yes, Al. Why? Why do you say that?
I think because of the experience of Africa and its people, it's difficult to look at a bright future.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just think of the delay of gratification, you know, with all this greed and corruption going on, give it to me now. You know, there's absolutely no ability to delay gratification. And Mandela doesn't belong in this box, and I'll explain why. Mandela doesn't fit in this box, and I'll explain why. He started his Mandela Foundation in his post-presidential phase. His love for children resulted in the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. He lost his only surviving son to AIDS. And that is why he knew he would have to fight and prevent this disease through advocacy. And that's why he started 46664. He wanted to bolster leadership development through Africa. That's why he started the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. So his thinking was way ahead of anybody. And indeed, you know, that continues to this day. So performance orientation, characterized by emphasis on education, reward, achievement, entrepreneurial behavior. Where do you think black leaders scored against their white counterparts 20 years ago? It's changed now, but where do you think they scored then?
Above.
Okay, they scored below. If you think of it, they appointed a president who had a standard 3 education. You know, it's extraordinary, but appointing Zuma. But Nelson Mandela doesn't fit into this box. He was passionate about education. And I'm going to read you a letter to demonstrate that. And if any of you want this letter after to read your own children, I'll happily provide it. But he's writing to his son, and this is dated before some of you were born, the 28th of July, 1969. And he says, I hate giving lectures, Khatu, even to my own children. But I would be failing in my duty if I did not point out that the death of Tembi brings a heavy responsibility on your shoulders. It is your duty to keep the family together and to set a good example for your sisters. This means that you will have to work harder on your studies. Never allow yourself to be discouraged by difficulties or setbacks, and never give up the battle, even in the darkest hour. Remember that we live in a new age of scientific achievement, the most staggering of which is the recent landing of man on the moon. This is a sensational event that will enrich man's knowledge. The younger generation must train and prepare themselves so that they can easily grasp the far-reaching repercussions of developments in the realm of space. This is an era of intense and vicious competition, in which the richest rewards are reserved for those who have undergone the most thorough training and who have attained the highest academic qualifications in their respective fields. The issues that agitate humanity today call for trained minds, and the man who is deficient in this respect is crippled because he's not in possession of the tools and equipment necessary to ensure success and victory in the service of country and people, to lead an orderly and disciplined life, and to give up the glittering pleasures that attract the average boy, to work hard and systematically in your studies throughout the year will, in the end, bring you coveted prizes and much personal happiness. Isn't that beautiful? Just extraordinary, writing to his son. So the last one is power distance. This is the only construct in which there's absolutely no difference between black and white leaders. They both consider themselves superior and entitled to privileges. But Mandela doesn't fit in this box. He was on record as saying, I have very little need for anything material. But he was very good at cajoling money out of the rich and famous for his projects, for building hospitals, for building schools. And in this conversation with his biographer, he talks about how he got money out of Maggie Thatcher. I met with Mrs. Thatcher for close to 3 hours, and naturally we discussed the question of sanctions and the general political situation in South Africa. She was very interested in our relations with Mangosuthu Buthelezi, and I made no impression whatsoever on the question of sanctions. But she was charming. And then I had a private lunch with her. She was very warm, you know. She was just the opposite of what I was told. Yes, and in fact, I then had to ask to be excused because I had to attend another appointment. But she was also very generous with her time, and I was tremendously impressed by her strength of character. Really an iron lady. And so I asked her for money. And there and then she wrote out a check for £100,000, a great deal of money. She was very generous too. I always imagine them sitting on their cloud, laughing like hell when I read this part. To end off this special story about him, it's no secret that the two of them were very close friends. When Clinton got to meet Mandela, he asked him, tell me the truth, weren't you really angry? He said, yes, I was angry and a little afraid. After all, I've not been free for so long. But he said, when I felt the anger well up inside me, I realized that if I hated them after I got outside that gate, they would still have me. And he smiled. And he said, I wanted to be free. That's why I let it go. It was an astonishing moment, said Clinton. It changed me. Mandela continues. Well, I hated them for 14 years, he said. And I'm not sure when I was young and strong if I wasn't kept alive by my hatred. But one day when I was breaking rocks, I realized they'd taken so much from me. They had abused me physically, they'd abused me emotionally, they had taken me away from my wife and children, they'd taken everything from me except my mind and my heart, And I realized I would have to give those things to them. And then I decided not to give them away. And then he looked at me and smiled, and he said, and neither should you. So remember, this is the time when the Republicans are trying to impeach Clinton over the Lewinsky debacle. Do you remember that? And Nelson Mandela telling him to fight. Clinton continues, what makes Mandela so special is that he's a real human being. He laughs, he cries, he gets mad. He fell in love with Graça Machel. He's lived a real life. And the fact that he's so flesh and blood really makes his greatness, sacrifice, wisdom, courage, in the face of all that has happened to him, even more remarkable. He's the living embodiment of second chances in life, giving them and getting them and becoming bigger through adversity. It's not just great. He's a good man, not because he's not perfect. He still has his flashes of anger and regret. But in the big moment, in the big ways, there's no one like him. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Gail. Let's just pause and see all the love and the applause coming through. While you pause, Gail, it's good to just check in the chat for some comments. And so, guys, thank you very much, Gail. I sat here very proud, and one of the comments was, or questions was, do we know anybody else who embodies resonant leadership? And there are quite a few people who agree that you are one of those people. So well done. You embody the very things that we see here. And to have examples like this, and Mandela and yourself and others who showed that to us. So we thank you. We celebrate you, Gail. We celebrate the African leaders who are resonant leaders and who are making a positive difference. And so to the rest of us, maybe take some time today to think of a leader who impacted you in so many ways, and it's the reason why you do what you do today and who you are today. So take a moment to give them a call, write them an SMS, send an email, have some coffee with him in the next couple of days. And so we do encourage that. Folks, so that's the end of the year for all of us. It was the best way to end. And Gail, thank you once again. Together, the I Group and the My Pocket Coach team, Gail, myself, Monique, and others, we wish you all the best for the holiday, a blessed Christmas, slow down a little bit, pause to speed up in the new year, and we're looking forward to seeing you all here. Gail's book is available either from the office in Randburg. I've got a few copies myself here, and so if you want to get a copy, simply for those in Cape Town, and I see quite a few of my friends here, reach out to me, and those in Johannesburg, reach out to Gail in the office there. All the best, guys, and have a good holiday.
Have a great holiday, everyone. Blessings to you and your family.
Merry Christmas all.
Hi, everyone. Cheers.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you. Good to see you, Andy. Take care.